Hi, this is Chris Haughey, and I want to thank you for joining me today for this easy painting tutorial. On today's Create with Chris, I will show you how to create this adorable chickadee and birdhouse using my simple tips, tricks, and techniques to make your painting world just a little bit easier and more fun. Starting out with a 4x12 MDF plaque using raw sienna and multi-purpose sealer. Loading my brush with a little bit of each. This is going to give me a good base coat as well as sealing the surface. Just putting a nice thin even application onto the surface and making sure every time I reload my brush I do pick up a little bit of that sealer and work it into the paint as I apply it to the surface. Give it a quick dry with my heat tool. Picking up some blue mist. I'm going to use a slip slap technique to apply the paint on. My brush is damp but not drippy wet. Just using the side of my brush, not the chisel edge. And I found that using an oval wash gives me more of a smoother stroke as opposed to a flat, which I often end up having straight lines that show up in the paint. Just blending it back and forth, picking a little blue mist as well as spa blue to brighten it. A very light coat. You can see the brush strokes, but you want to make sure that you just don't have any big spotty areas. I'm going to be adding several applications of paint, so this is just the first base. Don't worry about being too particular because by the time we get the final layer on, it's going to look fantastic. I picked up a little bit of spa blue, and I was going to take this out because I didn't shake my paint well enough and it was super thin. It didn't go on well at all. Not getting good saturation, so I decided to leave that in there and just show you what I did. Wipe it off, shake the bottle really well, and get some of the mixed paint. Now I'm working very quickly so that I can go back into the previously applied paint areas and blend it in. Slip slapping using the side of the brush, not the chisel edge. It's just going to give a really nice painted effect. Let that dry. I'm going to start back up at the top. And I did pick up a little bit of that foliage green, not to make the sky green, but just to give a hint of color up there. Picking up more of the blue mist, blending it over and over back into the wet paint, working from the top to the bottom. And as I go down into the green area, I don't have a straight division across the middle where it blends one color into the other. Kind of let that just fade almost at an angle. Just looks a little bit more artsy, and it's just a little more effective. As I get to the bottom, I do pick up some of that raw sienna. It gives it kind of an earthy color. That foliage green is a little bit too bright. I wanted this to have more of those deeper, richer colors. Again, just working from the top down, adding color as I go, blending back into the prior colors to get that soft blended look. I love the way that raw sienna effect with the green. It just really adds a richness. A little bit of warmth down there. Pulling the brush up to kind of indicate maybe some blades of grass or growth back there. Just, it's going to be a very soft effect. Probably most of it will be covered up, but if it's visible, that's going to look great. I want to make sure this is super dry because if you put wet paint on partly dried paint, you're just going to lift it off and kind of have a mess. So take time in between layers to give a quick dry. That way everything's going to stay put as you apply the paint. Again, my paint is super thin, very, very light coat. What this does, it will apply a layer of paint, but it also allows the previous layers to kind of show through a little bit. All in all, it just gives a fantastic look. And I do have the film sped up just a little bit, so I'm working quickly, but not quite as quickly as it indicated in the speed of the film. Wanted to add a little bit of design in the background. I'm using, it's called a mishmash stencil. It's a fantastic stencil. It has a lot of different elements on it that can be used as it's laid out on the stencil, but I decided I wanted to pick and choose. I thought it would be cute to have those little music notes around where the bird was going to be, kind of a sing-song. Using Snow White and my Spectacular stencil brush, I designed this stencil brush because I wanted a stencil brush that had soft bristles instead of the really coarse bristle that most of them have. You're able to get a much more dry brushed effect. I like that soft look. And I'm just kind of juggling between the Snow White and Blue Mist, where at the top against the sky, the white's going to show up better. As you get towards the bottom, it's too much of a stark contrast, so I'm kind of toning it down with the spot blue. And I'm just picking and random designs to put in the background. Very, very subtle effect. I load my brush and then I wipe the excess. You can see the paper towel on the left. I wipe it off to get the heavy paint off so that I don't have a real harsh, strong design. I just want to keep this design a little on the quiet side. And doing almost a circular motion with my brush to dry brush that design on there. And it looks like I'm laying design over design. I just am looking to see where it needs to be filled in. I'm not overlapping, but if there's any blank areas, I'll just pick an element and stick it in that area just to kind of add more design. I always compare this to wallpaper on a wall. It's just something you really don't notice, but it looks good. I thought I would like a few little butterflies up in the top corner. After I did it, I didn't like the way it looked, so I decided to go back and just add a few more notes instead. I didn't take them off, but I just added some music notes to fill that in. Take a look at it, make sure that you just have some design pretty much everywhere. The middle is where the birdhouse is going to be, so that's not super important. I wanted this to have kind of a distressed look. I'm using charcoal gray and my palette knife, and I just slide it through the paint. There's hardly any paint at all on the bottom of it, and I'm just scraping it over top of the surface. And you can see that it takes a little bit to get that paint off because I just have such a minimal amount on the bottom of the palette knife. Take your time on this. It just kind of, you can see it's just a light coverage. It's just a little bit of texture, but it does make a big difference. Focusing mostly around the edges and the sides and the edges. A little bit heavier at the bottom. I always think the weight of a design needs to be towards the bottom, and that's going to help give the up and down more weight at the bottom. Little bit of plantation pine. It's kind of a transparent color, translucent color. I'm going to shade it down the left side across the bottom and part way up the right side. I always think that it looks a little better if the shading is not even, so I brought it up the left side a little bit higher than on the right side because this is so translucent and I thinned it down so much. All of that texture is going to still be visible. I did trace on my birdhouse and position the pattern. I've got it anchored down with a piece of painter's tape. I have trouble with straight lines, so I always use a T-square and bump it against the bottom of the plaque to make sure that my lines go straight up and down. If you have issues with this, I have an astigmatism in my eye, so it's hard for me to get that line straight. There's tools that can help. So if you have a weakness, look for a tool and it will make your life so much easier. I just went ahead while I have that ruler and traced on those roof lines as well. Why struggle with a straight line when you've got that ruler right there to make your life so much easier? take out the graphite paper and take a peek, and it looks fantastic. Now I don't have to worry. I know my building, my little birdhouse building, is not going to be angled. And it's so very important to make sure that if you're painting a structure that it doesn't lean. Using cobblestone, beautiful kind of a gray, brown, gray tan color. And I'm putting it on as my base for the birdhouse. Using my 3/4 inch angle. I love the way that the toe of the brush fits so perfectly up in those eaves, and I can just position that brush and pull it straight down. I do, when I am working on an object that has direction, I do follow the direction of the object. And what I mean by this, I'm going up and down because I know the boards on that birdhouse go up and down. And I'm putting on a very even, not super thick coat. If your paint is thinned down a little bit with water, it's going to go on so much smoother. And it looks so much better to have 2 light coats as opposed to 1 heavy coat. Just make sure that you do dry it in between applications. Again, I'm using my heat tool. Absolutely love it. It's very effective. It's the best dryer I've ever found. It's super quiet and it's very efficient. It works quickly. You can see my birdhouse is a little bit transparent, so I am going to put another quick coat on. It's going to be thin as well, so it's super easy to apply 2 thin coats, a lot less work, and it's going to look a lot better than trying to get 1 heavy coat on there. Making sure those edges are kept clean and crisp. Just letting the toe of that brush work in those areas. And give that a quick dry. While that is drying, I'm going to work on the post at the bottom. Raw sienna. Again, just keep it the direction of the post, straight up and down, vertical strokes, and pull it down. First coat, you just want to get an even coverage on it. Doesn't have to be solid and heavy. Trying to get just the right size brush for the birdhouse roof. Going with a flat number 8. If you have even pressure, the width of the brush is perfect for the width of the roof. Load your brush well, don't press hard, and just slide it on there. And you can see how thin my paint is. I'm just worried about getting it on nice and even and straight. How easy is that? If you load your brush too heavy and press down, you'll also get, it'll start out one size, and as you press down, it gets a little bit wider. If your paint is not flowing on smoothly and evenly, you don't have enough moisture in your brush. So try adding a little more water. It's going to make it flow on there so nicely. And don't worry if it's not solid. Another coat is so much easier than trying to get 1 heavy coat on there. That's kind of a mess. Using the same palette knife technique to apply the look of chip paint on the birdhouse. And I do want to keep my boards going vertical, so that's how I'm pulling the knife down. And just kind of letting that slide off of the knife. Be patient. Don't try to go too fast. Don't try to get too much heavy paint or you'll get really solid. I almost have too much there at the bottom. But I know I want my birdhouse to be very bright white. So this is just the first of the applications to get that weathered, outdoor, worn look. And just let that paint, and almost like spreading peanut butter on a piece of bread. Just keep it flat and let it just slide off. If you've watched any Bob Ross, he uses a palette knife quite a bit. It's that same idea, just using it in a different application. And pulling it down. Just wanted to get it pretty much over the entire surface of the birdhouse. Also want to create the look of wood grain as well. So I've got a rake brush and I'm loading it with thinned Snow White, and Snow White's what we used on the chipped paint. But when you load your brush, you want to make sure that you can still see that the bristles are split. Enough moisture to pull that paint and get those rows of wood grain. If you press too hard on a rake brush, you're going to get a solid coverage. You want to stay up on those tips. This is no different than the background. We're just going to be adding several layers of paint using different techniques. All of them are super simple, but when they're all combined, it's going to be super impressive as well. Also, what this is doing is kind of pulling the birdhouse together so that it's not quite, it doesn't have that spotty look. Using the stain brush, I'm staying up on those chisel edges. I'm just using that chisel edge to draw a straight edge on the sides and keep those nice and sharp. See how you can just pull that straight down. Always, as you're painting, take a minute to look at it and evaluate it to see where you may need to add more, or if there's some bare areas where it needs just to be a little more attention, a little more paint in that area. It's a constant evaluation, and as you train your eye, you'll become very familiar with locating those areas that need just a touch more here and there. Decided I wanted to add a little bit of color, so I've picked up just a touch of spa blue on the corner of my 1/4 inch angle, still maintaining that vertical plank of the birdhouse look. So I'm just pulling very light hints of color down the birdhouse. I don't want a blue birdhouse, but I wanted just that little bit of reflection of the sky in that wood grain. Looking at it now and giving it a quick dry so that I can continue working on it. Always very important. You want to make sure that last layer of paint is dry before you add another layer on. I thought at this point it still looked a little bit thin and not quite as bright as I wanted. Going with more Snow White, add another application of the chipped effect. I did switch to a flat. I've been using an angle knife, but I thought maybe the flat knife had more surface on it. And now I'm going just directly up and down. This will really start to enhance that effect of different board planks down the front. Just take your time. Don't try to be fast. Fast isn't always the best result. But now it's starting to look like planks. And I'll just go over it until you're satisfied with how it looks. This paint's a little bit thicker when you apply it this way, so again, make sure you dry it well. Picking up a little bit of charcoal gray, make sure it's dry. on my 3/4 inch angle, I'm going to float a shadow underneath the eave on both sides. And to make it look just a little more wood grainy, I'm going to take the toe of my brush and just pull it down into the wood grain. How impressive is that? Still going to maintain that strong shading underneath the eave, but it just brings that earthiness down into the birdhouse front. Look how great that looks. Just so simple. Very thin wash of paint. Charcoal gray is a very strong color, so it doesn't take much to give a really nice effect. Same thing across the bottom. Pull that float off across, and then just use the toe of your brush to pull it up into the birdhouse. Doesn't that look great? It's still wet. You can play around with it and move the paint once it starts to dry. Make sure it's completely dry. If you need to go back and add more, let it dry first, and then you can go back and easily add more. Now I realized that for some reason the camera did not pick up when I painted the star, and I thought this was a super easy way to do it. I am going to use a stencil. You can paint it, draw the star and paint it, but I'm using my Spectacular stencil brush and raw sienna to just put a light base coat of the star and clean my brush. I just wiped it on a paper towel, picked up some charcoal gray, and I'm going to dry brush the bird hole in as well. Very light. I don't want this solid and heavy. I don't want a black hole. We're going to add depth inside the hole, so I want to make sure it's just really light. Make a dot in the center of the star, pull a line out from the tip to the center, and then go in that little crook and pull a line from there, that little valley to the center, and fill it in. I'm using thinned charcoal gray. Pull a straight line to the tip of the tine and to that little valley. Paint in that little triangle. Each one will go out to the tip of that tine, and then just paint that little triangle in all the way around. Make sure that the paint is pretty much even, so you don't have one triangle darker than the other. And continue around to create each one of those dimensional sections. Super simple, just like that. It's really dimensional. Very, very easy to do, from the tip to the center and from the valley to the center. Put a little bit of shading on the left side of the birdhouse hole. And I think I address that later on in the video as well. I did have a little bit of over stenciling on the background, and I have a tool called a Mono Zero eraser, which is a teeny tiny little eraser. It's perfect for erasing pencil lines. But if you dampen it, you can remove dry paint with a really light rub. Painter's best friend. Every painter should have one of those because they are just ideal. To make the dimensional stars stand out just a little bit more, taking some Snow White, my Epic script liner, which is an 18-aught medium length liner. Just going to paint a nice thin line across the ridge of each one of those sections, right to that center point. And this is what finishes that star, makes it just kind of radiate with dimension. Wanted that center just a little bit brighter. It looks like that's where the sunlight's going to hit. So just going on those top ridges. Perfect. And to make the star seat or fit on that birdhouse, just a little bit of shading around the outer edge. And this is charcoal gray, just using the toe of my 1/2 inch angle to float a shadow against the star onto the front of the birdhouse. It's a little bit stronger on the bottom and the right side. Placing the tracing back on and slipping graphite paper in there, I'm just going to trace the outline of the bird and all of these sections, like the dark sections, the wing, the body. Make sure everything's there. Go back, and I missed a couple. I have to go back and put on there. I wanted this little bird to be kind of fluffy and fat and have a lot of color, and it's hard when you're looking with a black and white bird to add all that color in. So we're going to bring a lot of different colors from the background into the bird, as well as adding some colors for warmth as well. I'm using raw sienna, cobblestone, warm white, snow white, and charcoal gray. I always keep my snow white and warm white kind of separate because they're easy to get mixed up. Big difference. Using my radical round, I love the point on it, and I'm just going to base coat in those dark areas with cobblestone. That's going to be our first base on those. Always paint in the direction of the feathers, and you're going to always, there's a little bit of shading down on the bottom right hand side. My highlights come from the top left, so I popped a little bit of that cobblestone down underneath his chest. The wing is going to be dark. Not too worried about perfect shapes. I just want to get that base in there. As we add the layers of color, we can kind of hone in on getting exact. Don't be messy, but don't be too fussy either about spending a lot of time. This is warm white. I'm going to put the first layer of feathers in the chest. Warm white's just a little bit darker. Pick up a little bit of that raw sienna on the bottom and right side. Adds a beautiful warm color in there. All of the chest areas with that warm white. Again, just make sure you keep that motion of the feathers. This is not smooth. You can see I'm kind of putting little chop strokes, and that's going to resonate kind of as a feather, just kind of stroking it. And you can see how those pull those little feather strokes in. The tip of the tail is going to be highlighted, and I picked up a little bit of cobblestone to kind of blend that in. The top of the wing's going to be a little bit highlighted because that's where the light's coming in, the top left side. And a little bit of spa blue. I wanted to touch some of that in his chest as well. It's just a little bit of sky reflection in there. Not much, just enough to add a hint of color. Now I'm going back with a little bit of the charcoal gray. Make sure, I'm just evaluating at this point if he has the right shape. With the charcoal gray, I'm working kind of into the wet paint, so it will kind of blend in with the prior layers. If your paint has dried, you can always pick up a touch of that cobblestone and work it in as well. Not heavy. There, I put a little cobblestone, the tip of the feathers. This is not a heavy layer of paint, just little touches of color. We're going to build that depth as we go. I think it's much easier to work on the whole bird as opposed to doing one section at a time. Add a little bit of shadow under the wing and kind of mute it with a little bit more of that warm white. Again, these are just real thin applications of color. Still picking up a little bit of raw sienna whenever I go to that bottom right side of his chest. Paint that little wing with a touch of charcoal gray. Add a little hint of highlight at the top. Little head's going to be darker. I never clean my brush. I just kind of wipe it off. If it becomes too thick and heavy, definitely clean it out, but I don't use much paint, so I don't have much buildup on my brush. This is where you make sure you're building the right shape of the head. And you might think, well, why do we put those light colors underneath? But there's a big difference between adding the charcoal gray all by itself or putting it over these undertones. The tail, base of the tail is going to be a little bit stronger. And see, it's starting to look like a little bird already. pulling those feathers down into the chest so that I get the look of fluffiness. It's going to be darker under his little head and neck area. On the right side will be a little bit darker. Bringing in even a darker tone with soft black. I rarely use lamp black because it is so strong, but I'm going in with a little bit of soft black to put a little light translucent shadow underneath the wing. I'm going to highlight the tips of those feathers just a touch with Snow White. Picking up, I have Snow White on my brush, picked up a little more of that soft black. It's not going to be quite as harsh. It's definitely, it's hard to tell on the video, but it's definitely a much stronger color. The area under his, pull that little bit around his neck. Kind of watch those shapes around his face. And pull that little chest down. Little line across the beak. Definitely want the base of the tail a little bit stronger. Shape those the wing up, nice round wing. A little bit darker on the front side. And picking up a touch of cobblestone, add a little highlight at the top. Every time I add the highlight on the darker area, it's just a little bit. You don't want to add strong highlights at this point. I want that tail base to be super dark. And a little bit of paint makes a big difference, and I know I will say that often, but it often doesn't take much, and so much of the time we add way more paint than we need to. I always add just a little bit and then take a look at it to see how that is working. Little tiny touches. Picking up a little bit of cobblestone to blend into that chest area, a little bit of raw sienna. I do want him to have a white chest, but right now we're just getting the layers of feathers on. It's starting to look really super fluffy, just little short strokes. Tap, 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 tap. Charcoal gray to deepen those dark areas. A little bit of soft black. Get that side wing. Pull a few little feathers out to make that little side wing fluffy. And we'll pull some feathers over there as well. Snow White. Tap those little chickadee markings on his wing. Wow, what a difference. Gonna finish that tail up. Now the tail is dark, but I want the tips to really show the feathers. So I'm pulling down some Snow White just to highlight those just a little bit. And we'll highlight, fill that wing in a little bit. Add a few little touches of strong highlight on the wing. Want the side wing, just a little bit of fluffiness over there with charcoal, with the cobblestone. A few little touches under his chin. And add a little bit more on the head. Highlight the top of the head with Snow White. See how those little touches, they're not, few little touches on the wing. If you float it on nice and solid, it looks smooth. It doesn't look look feathery and fluffy. A little bit of spa blue to highlight the top of that beak. And I'm going to darken the bottom with charcoal gray. Raw sienna to paint the eye. You can use the handle end of your brush to dip dot the eye, going back with a little bit of charcoal gray around the outer edge. Don't lose that raw sienna. Use your stylus to dip dot a soft black pupil. I'm going to brighten up just the center of his chest a little bit with Snow White. Little touches, tiny little touches. I'm using the toe of my 1/4 inch angle. I had that in my hand and just picked it up here. Cobblestone to deep, I want to keep those shadows at the bottom. A little bit of raw sienna. Love the way that works. Look at that. Just really looks fantastic. I'm tapping it up into the feathers so we don't have a straight line of anything. A little more shadow under the wing. Tap it out so it looks like a shadow and not a touch of paint. And it does just have to go back and forth enough until you're satisfied with it. A little touch here, a little touch there, and pretty soon it all just comes together and looks fantastic. A little more highlight on the tail. Got such a bright highlight on his chest, we need to make sure that the other highlights are just as intense. They're all coming from the same light source. We needed to reshape his head just a little bit. He needed more of a forehead. Yes. Kind of touching it to give a little bit of fluffiness on the feathers up there as well. Put a little brightness underneath his eye. And a touch of spa blue in there, just a little bit under on his cheek, a little bit on his chest. And it's just a touch. It's not a heavy application of paint, just a light touch. A little bit of a highlight in his eye. And define that beak just a little bit more. Those little details will make a big difference. I am loading my Epic script liner. I don't want my bird to be floating on the peak of that roof, so we're going to add a little bit of, he or she's holding twigs in his little feet, so we'll put a little nest up there and just continue to pull those little sticks out. Make sure that they're not even and symmetrical. Got one in his beak. Raw sienna is a perfect color, but it's a little bit translucent, so by itself it's not very visible. Pick up a little bit of that warm white with the raw sienna and add some more little twigs. Not necessarily going over the ones I have, I'm just adding more. I want that to be rather full down below where he's nesting. And a little bit of highlight just on some of them. Leave a shadow area up against his chest. Here we go. Because you have that darkness there, you need to really make it stand out. It's all about contrast. Make sure the paint flows well. Don't forget to add a little highlight on the twig in his mouth. If it's not flowing well, just add a little touch of water. Highlight that beak just a bit. Going back with a little bit of soft black to darken that area below his head. It just seemed like it wasn't quite dark enough. I don't want it really solid. So after I darken it, I'll pick up just a touch of charcoal gray to break it up just a little bit. And tap those in to give that indication of feathers. I was looking at it and I thought his shoulder and his chest all blend together. I thought I would brighten his chest up, but I thought, well, maybe I just need to bring that up a little bit and just right there add a little bit of whiteness. Very thin, that dark shows through, it looks like a shadow. It's just perfect. I was super pleased with it. Adding a little shadow below the bird with charcoal gray to darken that rooftop. And I should have done that before I put the sticks on, because now I have to go back and highlight a few of the sticks. And I think I should have let the paint dry, so I'll probably add a few highlights after the paint dries. It's kind of hard to get that brightness on there. Because we have the darkness at the top, I'm going to add just a little more darkness on the bottom at the base of the, I guess it's the top of the post, right below the base of the birdhouse, with soft black. Make that inside of the birdhouse hole just a little bit darker as well. Brighten that post up just a little bit more with a little scraping of snow white. Evaluate. Picking up just a little bit of cobblestone and a touch of charcoal gray. I switched it to cobblestone and raw sienna. Start to paint the twigs inside. You know, the charcoal gray is not going to work on the inside, and the lighter colors don't work on the outside, so you kind of have to bring the light out and then the dark in so that they show up well. I did wiggly sticks, but then I thought, well, maybe they should be a little more straight, so I added some more straight sticks on there as well. Nope, I wasn't happy with that. I'm going to wipe that off and start over. Going with charcoal gray. They needed to be straighter sticks, so if you're not happy, redo. And I picked up a little bit of raw sienna on a dirty brush. I rarely clean my brush when I'm working like this. For the inside dark area, you're going to need to brighten the color up just a wee bit. Pick up some of that warm white, snow white, spa blue, any of those colors, raw sienna, they all work well. Just keep adding the sticks using the charcoal gray. I want it to be full. I don't want it to be just a few sticks. the highlights aren't going to show up on the sticks that are outside on the birdhouse front. So you have to focus the highlights mostly in the dark central area. And they're going to continue back inside. And once that gets filled up, and I don't think I addressed the birdhouse post. That was a dip dot of raw sienna shaded around the outer edge with a little bit of charcoal gray, and then float a shade around the little post with charcoal gray as well. Add a little tiny speckle of highlight on the top left of each one of those birdhouse perches to help make them stand out. Now that I know what I'm doing with the sticks, I'll add more in the second hole down at the bottom. Start with the charcoal gray. Once you get those all kind of lined in there, pick up that raw sienna, a little bit of water, and start adding more color. Kind of fun to add these little touches. And back inside, I was trying to decide if I need to add more sticks in the background. So I thought I would put some in just to see how they're going to look. I like the way that looked. I thought, yeah, there's going to be more sticks back in that background, so I'm going to pop some back in there. Don't want to fill that hole completely up, but I'll show you a little trick we're going to do to make that work. Spa blue, a few little highlights of spa blue is just going to add that hint of color. You do it on one, make sure you do it on the other. Adding sticks in the background. Just kind of fill that up. Little bit of charcoal gray. I'm going to wash over those background sticks just to push them in there, and I did let it dry. So it's just going to look like they're way back in there because I put that wash of color over it. It just works out perfectly. A little bit of paint makes such a big difference. I think that is my motto. Looks pretty good. I think I am satisfied with that. So now I'm going to put the pattern on there and trace on the, whoops, before I do that, because I like everything so well, I'm using the ultra matte varnish just to put a layer over top. Everything looks great. By using the ultra matte varnish, it's going to dry to a super flat finish. It's identical to the same finish that's on the paint, so you can dry brush over it. It just creates that protective layer, so if I don't like what I'm doing, I can lift it off and not dig into the background. Using my number 8 filbert number 6 filbert, I'm just placing in the petals of the flower, and I'm letting the brush create the shape of the flower. So each stroke is either a bud or a flower petal. And I don't have my flowers perfectly symmetrical. They're a little bit lopsided because they're visible at different angles. So that just gives a little more interest, and they're a little more realistic as well. Keep this very, very simple. Flowers can sometimes be a little stressful. This is probably, you can't get any more simple than these. Super easy to create. And let that dry. That is terra coral. I'm going with plantation pine to add the stems. And I can add the stems later, but this way they're behind the flowers. And so as we finish the flowers, I don't have to go in and try to be careful. Switch to my Epic script liner, just have a little more control on that. Make sure that every flower has a stem that's kind of making sure it's connected. Now's the time to put the leaves in. Normally what I do is double load my filbert with foliage green and plantation pine, tap on my palette to blend a little bit, and then keep the foliage green to the top and just kind of paint those leaves in. They just did not show up. They blended in with the background too much, so I ended up just using straight plantation pine. Works out really well. We'll gussy them up later. Press down, twist, and pull out to a point. This little leaf ended right up at the edge of the pole or post. I didn't like that. It either has, yeah, it needs to be on this side. It just didn't look good. And just add a couple up above there. Just to kind of balance it out, fill them in a little bit. Anywhere it looks a little bare, stick a leaf. I am going with Wild Berry, which is a darker pink, and Snow White. Hang in there with me because this is going to look not too great, but I'm going to double load my filbert. This is number 6 filbert. It's the same one we use for the petals. Blend it out a little bit and just kind of stroke on each one of those buds and flowers. Reloading often so that I have a two-tone application on my brush. You want to be able to see light and dark. I'm going to put one stroke for every petal, trying to keep that bright white toward the top or the outer edge of the petal, not being too particularly fussy, just making sure that each petal is going to have a light and a dark stroke of paint on it. I lost my dark there, so I need to go back and put that dark in there. They're going to look almost like puffy marshmallows. Double load often, or reload often with a double load. Little buds, I like having the 2 strokes on those. I think it just gives them makes them look a little bit fuller. I think most of the flowers have 5 petals. They always say odds work out better. Okay. Tried to soften them a little bit so they don't have like a straight separation between the light and the dark. Now I'm going with a little bit of charcoal gray to add a shadow, a drop shadow on the birdhouse. It's going to be to the right and below anything that overlays on that birdhouse. Huge difference. This is such an epic application of paint. You want to make sure that every shadow is transparent, so you're going to be able to see the wood grain and everything through that paint, but huge, just absolutely huge. Now I have wild berry on the toe of my 1/4 inch angle, going in to deepen the base of each petal and the center area. It's going to tone down that brightness as well. So now it's going to start to come together, and they're going to start beginning to look like flowers instead of puffy marshmallows. See how that tones that down. It's not a fussy flower at all. Just darkening the base of those little buds as well. Just keeping the toe of my brush loaded with paint, and use the clean part to kind of clean up any areas that may need just a little more. Well, that toned them down, so now they don't look so puffy. They're starting to lay more in the shape of a flower. Getting just a little touch of charcoal gray on my brush. I'm going to shade across the bottom and up the right side of the buds, and then at the base of each petal, and kind of pull it up into the petals just a tiny bit. Make sure this is not too dark. This is a very, very strong color. You just need a hint of color. Use a lot of water, just a little bit of paint to kind of deepen that center area. This is going to create a real strong central section of the flower and give those petals a little bit of veins and a lot of shadowing. Also use this if you have petals that overlap. You can add a little shadow below or between where they overlap. Lots of water, just very super thin. And I do work each petal at a time. That way I can add a shade if I need to, as well as float the center and the base. A charcoal gray is such a beautiful color, and it's such a great way to add depth, and it works well with just about any shade or any hue of paint. It's just really a nice accent color. Keep that color really soft. Had to clean my brush because the paint was just a little too strong. You definitely don't want a dirty flower, so keep it tight in that center area. Don't bring it out clear to the outer tip of the petals. I always keep a paper towel close by just to pull off any excess water. Keep that paint nice and fluid. Okay, so the base and the right side of the buds, and then the base and the centers of the flowers. Just getting a little bit of Snow White, going back to highlight the where the light's going to touch on those petals. And it's not every single petal, because some petals will stick out more than others. They're going to catch the light a little bit stronger. So kind of pick and choose where you want your strong highlights to be. And I'm just touching a little bit of paint. Especially on a video, when you add white, it looks a lot stronger. It's going to dry and tone down a little bit. So it's not quite as intense as what it appears right now. So I always recommend just adding a little bit. And if you think it needs to be stronger, you can go back and enhance it. You can see the ones on the left are starting to tone down. They're not quite as strong as they were when I first put the paint on. I have a little bit of plantation pine on the toe of my radical round, and I'm painting the little base of the flower petals, the stamen. And that's just going to nest around each one of those buds. And I do both sides, and then a little third one in the center that doesn't come up quite as tall. Just make sure they're nestled in there nice and snug, and that they connect to the vine. It's nice and strong. Again, I went back with foliage green to highlight those sepals, and it just didn't show up. So my secret color is spa blue. And we've used spa blue in the bird, we've used on the birdhouse, just a little bit everywhere. Spa blue is a beautiful color to highlight with, and it's just going to look fantastic. Look how that makes those little leaves just really stand out, tucked in around that bud perfectly. And it doesn't take much, just a little hint of color. Just going to make that stand out perfectly. If it seems too strong, just add a little touch of plantation pine just to tone it down. And that's just going to make a little hint of green on there. Want to add a little bit of highlight on the leaves using the same color. Spa blue, just a tiny touch of green in it. Just to highlight where that sun's going to hit. Fingers are a great tool to blend with. I use them often. Don't turn the leaves blue, you just want to add that little bit of highlight in there. What a world of difference that little bit makes. Going back into Snow White. Did not clean my brush, but I'm going to add just a pop of highlight on each leaf. Just a touch. If you add too much, then it becomes way too busy. Just a little splash of color. That makes all of those When you're adding this little touch of white, add it where it seems kind of dark and dull. Look up there, up the sky. That one just kind of is not too visible. We added a lot of leaves, so I am going to connect those. I'm using my Epic script liner with plantation pine. If it doesn't show up, add a little bit of charcoal gray to your paint, and it's going to give it a little more strength of color. Connect all those leaves so they're not floating. It's always best to work, if you're right-handed, from left to right. That way you're not dragging your hand through it. That makes a world of difference to bring those all connected. Okay, take a good look at your flowers to make sure that they're all have stems, all the leaves have highlights, all the petals have a little bit of brightness on them. Just a little touch up on that post, it didn't look quite right. Little raw sienna. And my initial plan was to dip dot the stamen in the center of the flowers with raw sienna and go back and highlight them with white. However, the raw sienna did not show up well, and when I dip dotted with white, I wasn't real crazy about how it turned out. So I thought, okay, I'm going to double load my stylus with raw sienna and snow white and see what that looks like. And that worked out perfectly. So dip one side of your stylus into snow white, the other side with raw sienna, and just tap it randomly in the center. Reload often. Keep your stylus perpendicular so you get the application of both colors. When you apply it randomly, you're going to get a varied assortment of dip dots in just little random areas, so they're not going to be perfect or symmetrical, which is exactly what you want. And that's going to brighten those flower centers up. You won't even notice that dark center. Doesn't that look fantastic? Super simple way. I did this first with when I painted poinsettias because I wasn't sure what color to use and nothing worked, so I did a double load, and it just gives a very interesting look. One more. Just tap around until it's nice and full. Reload often. Okay, I thought that looked pretty good. I want to make sure that I dry it well because those dip dots are always going to be a little bit thicker and take a little bit longer to dry. I thought the flowers needed something else. I was going to just do kind of a loose, kind of a wavy line around the outside edge of those petals. Love the way that looked. It gives it kind of a frilly look. Make sure when you do this, your paint is nice and thin so that it flows very smoothly off of your brush using my Epic script liner and a small wavy line. If your zigzags are too pronounced, or if your wavy lines are too pronounced, it's going to look like zigzags and it's not going to be lacy and frilly. It's just going to look a little bit awkward. So, and there were a few of them I put on. I thought, that was just a little too much. But look what a world of difference. It takes those flowers from those smooth edges and gives it that little ruffly, frilly look. It's just amazing. I think I may be using this technique a lot in the future. I love the way it turned out. Okay, a little word to the wise. If you start at the top and work your way down, you won't have to try to figure out if you missed any. Work from the left to the right. There were some of them I kind of jumped around a little bit. I think I was getting a little anxious because I was so excited. Look how nice that looks. I was really excited about these. It's amazing what a little bit of different paint makes this huge difference. It really dresses it up. Everyone paints easier one direction than the other, so if you need to spin your piece around to make it easier, you'll get much better results. You need to paint what's comfortable for you. I think that one was just a little bit too zigzaggy. So I've got my little mono zero. I'm gonna, remember I put that nice protective barrier below so I don't have to worry about it. If you're not happy with it now, you're not going to be happy with it later. So if there's something you're not pleased with, now's a good time to correct it. And get that finished up. Don't forget your buds. They need a little bit of ruffleness too. And I did both sections of that little bud as well, just to make it look a little frillier. And just a few more strokes, and I think these will be can really tell the ones that don't have that little bit of a wave on them. They just look a little bit plain. Erase any tracing lines. Make sure that you don't have anything still showing. Once it's completely dry, you can put a good coat of acrylic varnish over top to protect it and complete it. I did want to go back and just bump up some of those highlights just a little bit. I think they need just a little. Remember how it dries, it's not quite as vivid as it is when it's first applied. So a second coat's just going to bring more strength to that highlight. I decided that all that pink at the bottom, I needed a little bit of color at the top. I tried the terra coral. I didn't like that, so went into the wild berry, put just a little bit of color up in the corner. Really looks pretty with that blue. Pull it down the sides. And it's just going to help balance out the top and the bottom. Absolutely looks beautiful. Just a little bit. You don't need a lot. I just have such a thin hint of color that it's not going to take away from the strength of the flowers or the color of the flowers. It's just going to pull it all together. And I think oftentimes if you don't have a frame on something, this is a great way to balance it out. And it's always that unexpected pop of color that you add. I'm going to put some down in the corner. That didn't work. Don't do that. We'll take that off of there. It just turned it kind of a not good. So just in the blue, down into the green a little bit. Let those flowers be the color at the bottom. And I don't like to balance everything perfectly, so I left the top left corner just a little bit stronger than the right side. And I think that's about it. I think our little bird's looking good. Oh, maybe we need to go back and just finish that eye up a little bit more. I added a highlight earlier, but it kind of settled down, so I put a little teeny stroke of Snow White. And then we'll add that. This is amazing, that little teeny sparkle in the eye. And he's just going to come to life. I have to get my glasses on right there. Wow, that little tiny sparkle, huge. A little big difference a little bit of paint makes. Look at that bird. He is so happy. So thank you for joining me today. All supplies available at Cupboard Distributing, www.cdwood.com. And if you like, please hit subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and look forward to you joining me next time on Create with Chris.